Hey everybody, my name is Chris Noring. This episode is called JavaScript Tip. This is one of many videos where I give you hopefully productive tips on things JavaScript. In this very first video in this series, we'll talk about something called TS-check. Now TS-check is an instruction that you can set on the top of your JavaScript file to make it verify whether you're authoring valid JavaScript. So what does that look? Well, we're going to open my favorite IDE, VS Code. There are many IDEs. This is mine. It works really well with this TS-check and it's able to help you. So let's dive into VS Code and see how that's done. So we open up VS Code. What we see here is 2 lines of code. Foo, that's being assigned a 3 and being also assigned a false. Now, if these 2 rows are very close to each other like this, you will discover your mistake, but because what you're doing is to change this from a number to a boolean, right? And most likely you don't want to do this. However, if there are tons of lines in between, you're not likely to discover your mistake, but it will come to bite you later. So what do you do to fix this? Well, first off, let's pretend we have this and you add TS-check. Now, by adding TS-check, it ensures that it's going to check this for you. So what it tells you is type boolean is not assignable to type number, and it's correct, right? Because you're changing the type that you're assigning to it. So for it to be happy again, you would probably need to assign it with a correct type, and now you can see that it's no longer complaining. But yes, so TS-check has your back with issues just like this. Now we have a situation that you might have encountered before. You have started at some point in time to define this function called add, where it took 3 params, and suddenly one day you decide to refactor this so it only takes 2 params, but your invocation code doesn't quite add up to it, right? So here you have an invocation code in which it takes 3 params, not 2 as the function is saying. Now TS-check can help you even here. By adding TS-check, it's able to tell you like, hey, this function has changed. It no longer takes 3 params, but 0 to 2. So you better change this code and wake up because you are changing things. Now we have a different piece of code. What we're looking at here is an object literal, an object with a ton of properties. Now imagine that you have declared this object somewhere else, maybe a different file altogether, and suddenly you do this. You try to do something with z here or z, and you try to assign it with a value. It might look fine to you, but what you don't know is that this property doesn't exist, and you have no way of checking that, because this might be a misspelling, right? There might actually be something that's called this, and it exists. So how do you fix this? Well, you can add a JSDoc comment, and what you do with that JSDoc or annotation is to say, hey, this is a type, game object is a type, and it has these properties. It has x, y, width, height, and get area, and get area is a function. So how does this affect us? Well, when you add TS-check, you see that it suddenly says, hey, I don't know what this property is. And what you can do to fix it is actually to say, well, it does exist. I just omitted it. So you're adding this and suddenly everyone's happy again. But the whole point of this is to make TS-check work in conjunction with this type declaration. Okay, now we have a similar scenario. We have a function this time around, but it passes an object as a property in there, and we can see that this object has this optional param, this should run. So what it does to make it optional is to say, hey, if config is actually defined, if it's passed to us, and if it has this property, then I can do things. Now, if we look at how this code is invoked, we see that the first invocation is just passing an object. In theory, this doesn't crash, right? Because we pass it with an object that has a can run property, and when this code runs, it says, well, I'm looking for should run, so I'm not going to do this. And that's fine. But in the next, on line 11 here, we see that we'd actually pass should run, so it will end up running this code. What we want to happen is to actually be told that this is wrong, because the way that we are using the code, can run is never used by our code, so passing it could be wrong even. So we add this JSDoc where we say that should run must be specified. So we are making should run required from having been optional. So we assume that it exists, and what we're saying is essentially that if you pass can run, I don't know what that is. This is the shape of my object. It's a configuration object that contains one and only one property, and it is called should run. Okay, we are looking at the example that we just left, but we wanted to show something interesting. So tscheck works to check everything, but we can actually ignore things too. So by adding tsignore on a specific line, we can ensure that this is not checked at all. That was all, folks. Just to recap, tscheck is very good stuff to add in your code, and I definitely add that to all my projects. Even though I don't want to add the full TypeScript thingy, I still want that verification. So add tscheck, it will make your code better.